For 5,000 years, every major civilization on Earth agreed on one thing. Egyptians, Romans, Chinese dynasties, the Ottomans, the British Empire, different continents, different languages, different gods, and they all landed on the same answer. Gold is money. Then, about 50 years ago, a handful of governments decided otherwise. Trust us, they said. Paper is money now. That experiment is starting to show its age. And the people who don't understand why gold mattered in the first place are the ones most likely to be blindsided by what happens to their savings next. I'm Felix Prin, former investment banker, now an economist, and today we're not doing the usual "should you buy gold" video. We're going deeper. What gold actually is, why civilization after civilization independently chose it, and what that tells us about the money sitting in your wallet right now. 3 parts. 1. What gold actually is, and why it isn't an investment in the way most people think. 2. What happened in 1971, and why the dollar has lost over 90% of its value since. 3. What central banks are doing with gold right now, and what it might mean for you. Let's get into it. Part 1. What gold actually is. A mentor once told me something that rewired how I think about money. Follow what can't be printed. 5 words. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It changes how you look at stocks, real estate, Bitcoin, and gold alike. Here's the question almost nobody asks. There are 118 elements on the periodic table. Why did humanity converge on this one? Was it random? Just because it's shiny? No. Gold is almost engineered to function as money. It doesn't corrode. No rust, no tarnish, no reaction with air or water. Pull a gold coin out of a 400-year-old shipwreck and it looks the same as the day it sank. Try that with iron. It's divisible. Melt it, cut it, shape it into coins or bars or flakes. Every piece is exactly as pure as the whole. It's malleable. 1 ounce can be hammered into a sheet covering roughly 100 square feet or drawn into a wire thinner than a human hair. T's scarce. It can't be synthesized. It can't be printed. It has to be dug out of the ground, and there's a hard limit on how much exists. Here's the number that surprises most people. All the gold ever mined in human history, every pharaoh's tomb, every central bank vault, every wedding ring, melted into a single cube, would fit inside roughly 3.5 Olympic swimming pools. That's the entire global supply for 8 billion people. Now here's a distinction most people, even most finance professionals, get wrong. Gold is not an investment. An investment produces cash flow. A rental property pays rent. A stock pays earnings. A bond pays interest. Gold does none of that. It just sits there. So what is it? Gold is money, a store of value, a measuring stick that reveals whether everything else, your currency, your savings, your real estate, is actually holding its value. Consider this. A Roman centurion around 2,000 years ago earned roughly 1 ounce of gold per month. Solid middle-class pay for the era. That ounce would buy him a quality toga, a leather belt, and a good pair of sandals. Essentially, a nice outfit. Today, an ounce of gold trades somewhere in the neighborhood of $4,000 to $4,700. What does that buy? A good suit, a solid pair of shoes, maybe a belt and tie to match. Gold didn't get more valuable over 2,000 years. It stayed remarkably constant. What moved was the currency measuring it. Gold isn't performing, it's just telling the truth about what's happened to the paper. 1971, and the anchor that got cut. So how did we end up trading actual money for pieces of paper? Before 1971, a US dollar wasn't just paper, it was a receipt. It represented a specific claim on physical gold. Carrying gold around was inconvenient, so paper became the stand-in. But the paper was redeemable. This was formalized in 1944 at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where 44 nations agreed. The US, holding the majority of the world's gold reserves after World War II, would peg the dollar to gold at $35 an ounce. Every other currency would then peg to the dollar. The dollar was as good as gold. That's literally where the phrase comes from. Through the 1950s and early 60s, this brought real stability, and much of the American middle class was built on that foundation. Then came the 1960s, an expensive war in Vietnam, expensive domestic spending programs, and a US government spending well beyond its means. The problem with a gold standard is that you can't print your way out of a deficit. More dollars in circulation requires more gold to back them, and there wasn't more gold. Other countries noticed. France, skeptical that US gold reserves actually covered the dollars in circulation, began redeeming its dollar holdings for physical gold, reportedly even sending a naval vessel to collect it. Other nations followed suit. It became, in effect, a bank run, except the bank was the United States. On August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon announced that the US was suspending the dollar's convertibility into gold. It was framed as temporary. 50-plus years later, it still hasn't been reversed. That was the moment the anchor was cut. From then on, the dollar wasn't backed by gold, silver, or anything physical, just the government's promise. That's what economists call fiat currency, money that has value because an authority declares it does. Why this matters: before 1971, gold scarcity capped how many dollars could exist, which capped inflation, which meant your savings held their value year over year. After 1971, there's no hard limit on money creation. Governments can print when it's politically convenient, during recessions, financial crises, pandemics, and each time, more dollars chase the same amount of goods. That's inflation, not just prices rising, but your money's purchasing power falling. The numbers make this concrete. Broad measures of the US money supply have expanded enormously since the early 1980s, and during 2020 to 2021 alone, a very large share of all dollars in existence were created in about 18 months. A $1971 today has roughly the purchasing power of a few cents. That's not a rounding error. It's a near total erosion of value for anyone who simply held cash over that period, through no fault of their own. The rules of the system changed underneath them. This also drives one of the quietest wealth transfers in modern history. Money flows from savers to borrowers and from cash holders to asset owners. If you own a house, stocks, or gold, inflation tends to lift your net worth on paper. If you're holding cash or living on a fixed wage, it erodes you slowly, year after year, in a way that's easy to miss until it isn't. Part 3. What central banks are doing right now. For decades, central bankers dismissed gold. Keynes famously called it a barbarous relic, outdated, irrelevant to a modern financial system. And yet, central banks have been buying gold at a record pace in recent years, over 1,000 tons annually, with purchases accelerating year over year. The buyers are concentrated in emerging markets: Poland, China, Brazil, Turkey, India, Kazakhstan, and others. 3 reasons show up consistently. De-dollarization. Many countries are reducing dependence on the dollar as the reserve currency. Gold carries no counterparty risk and no foreign policy. Sanctions risk. After Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, roughly $300 billion of Russian reserves held in Western currencies were frozen. Other nations took note. Dollar reserves can be frozen by decree. Gold, held domestically, can't be frozen the same way. Debt concerns. US federal debt has climbed toward the $35 to $40 trillion range, growing by roughly $1 trillion every few months. Central banks read balance sheets too, and many appear to be hedging quietly rather than announcing it. None of this means the dollar is collapsing tomorrow, but when central banks, major investment banks, and retail investors are all leaning the same direction on an asset simultaneously, it's worth paying attention to, not as certainty, but as a signal. To be clear, this is education, not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, and allocation decisions depend entirely on your own circumstances. Holding pure cash carries a real cost. It feels safe day to day, but if inflation consistently outpaces the interest a savings account pays, purchasing power erodes slowly and invisibly, until you notice it at a big purchase or at retirement. Not all gold exposure is equal. Physical gold, gold ETFs, mining stocks, and futures all carry different risk and liquidity profiles. Physical gold, coins, bars, no counterparty risk, but requires secure storage and generates no income. Gold ETFs, for example, GLD, IAU, liquid and low cost, but you're trusting a financial institution rather than holding the metal directly. Mining stocks, effectively a leveraged bet on the gold price with company-specific risk layered on top. Silver, smaller market, meaningful industrial demand, electronics, solar, medical devices, and historically more volatile than gold. Sizing matters. Many family offices and sovereign wealth funds hold something in the range of 5 to 15% of a portfolio in gold, treated as insurance, not a core growth position. Concentration in either direction, 0% or an outsized share, carries its own risks. Gold isn't a magic solution, and it isn't going to double your money overnight, but it's a useful instrument. A 5,000-year-old lie detector that doesn't care about elections, press conferences, or political cycles. It just sits there, patiently, telling you the truth about what's happening to the currency around it. A mentor once put it this way: currencies don't collapse overnight any more than newspapers did. Both declined gradually, for years, while everyone insisted it was fine, until, one day, it wasn't. You don't have to predict the ending. You just have to understand the mechanism well enough to make your own informed decision, before it's obvious to everyone else.